Hello and welcome. You're watching Our Conversations, and this is ZTN Prime. Now, Our Conversations is the show where we speak to leaders in both Africa and globally. We speak to movers and shakers. We hear the real stories right from them. Now, tonight it's my pleasure to be speaking to the ambassador of Japan to Zimbabwe, His Excellency Satoshi Tanaka. Your Excellency, thank you for talking to ZTN Prime. It's welcoming us into your home.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me today.
Now, Ambassador, during the last 26 years, the exports of Zimbabwe to Japan have decreased at an annualized rate of 7.14% from about 193 million in 1995 to only 28 million in 2021. And over the same period, exports of Japan to Zimbabwe have also decreased at a rate of 5.95% annually from about 180 million in 95 to 36 million in 2021. That's information according to the Observatory of Economic Complexity. So I suppose the question is, sir, how important is the bilateral trade between Zimbabwe and Japan? But also, what has led to the decline in those numbers?
Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. Of course, the bilateral trade with Zimbabwe is very important for Japan because Zimbabwe has a huge potential. In early 2000, there were more than 20 Japanese companies in this country. However, they withdrew to neighbor country in response to rapidly worsening economic conditions, especially after 2005. Some companies are still interested in business relations with Zimbabwe, but there have been, of course, obstacles. Among the biggest factors are probably the unstable financial and monetary situations. I understand Zimbabwe government has been working very hard to address these kind of issues, and I hope that will lead to a more favorable business environment. And we have made efforts to improve business relations with Zimbabwe. For instance, in February 2019, Embassy invited JETRO, that is the Japan External Trade Organization, a business delegation that were made up of leaders of several major Japanese companies into Zimbabwe. In August of the same year, JETRO and Zimtrade signed an MOU to enhance business ties between our two countries. It will allow small to medium enterprises to be better prepared to access the Japanese market. Our embassy is also working to encourage Japanese business community in South Africa to come to Zimbabwe and actually see the business opportunity for themselves.
So what do you believe, in your view, would be required to reignite the trade between the two countries? I mean, you heard the numbers and the quite steep decline. I mean, 193 in 1995 to 28 million in 2021, and vice versa, 180 million to only 38 million. So what do you think really needs to be put in place to ensure that Japanese companies are attracted to come and invest here, that reignites that trade?
It is a very important task for me as well. And I recall the Vice President Chiwenga, he said at the ZITF meeting this April that it was the business sector that would build the economy and promote the very positive trend in the economy. And that the government had just a role to play in developing an enabling environment for business. I totally agree with him on that. Business sector in Japan is really carefully looking at both risks and opportunity in the market of Zimbabwe, and we need to provide them with the relevant and updated information for their business planning. For that purpose, we have been inviting Japanese companies to participate at ZITF every year to promote their products. We are also exploring some opportunities to provide information to Japanese companies in South Africa who are very interested in trade and investment opportunity in Zimbabwe. But anyway, I believe that a more stable business environment here in Zimbabwe is indispensable to attract Japanese companies and also other companies.
So you're hopeful then that you will see hopefully an increase in bilateral trade. I mean, if I look at the numbers, if you say in 2021, Zimbabwe exported 28 million, as I said, worth of products. The main products exported were non-iron and steel slag, ash and residues, 14 million of that, raw tobacco, which is 5 million, and calcium phosphates, which is 3 million. So I suppose, how can we increase those type of exports and also understand what Japan requires from Zimbabwe? I think that's more important, isn't it?
It is well known that Zimbabwe boasts a huge potential for trade enhancement, such as natural resources, agricultural products, and its geographical situation may be also beneficial to the regional trade. I think it is important to make the most of these advantages. Therefore, in terms of our support, maybe government support to Zimbabwe, we attach a great importance to how we can contribute to regional connectivity. For instance, we supported the road improvement of the northern part of the North-South corridor and the one-stop border post project. And we are preparing to give technical assistance to the Southern African power pool as well. Also, in order to promote the further utilization of Zimbabwe's rich resources, we have supported irrigation scheme and horticulture and the tourism sector as well. Those efforts may also stimulate exports to Japan. However, it may be helpful for more information on the Zimbabwe's products and their merits to be disseminated to the Japanese market, because they are not really aware of the huge potential Zimbabwe has.
You're right, the communication is important. At least people understand what we can provide and what they can also buy or procure from Zimbabwe. Let's look at it from the other way around. And this is something which I know Zimbabweans have always spoken about, and that was the main issue of second-hand cars. I think most of the exports from Japan to Zimbabwe, 36 million in 2021, were delivery trucks, 17 million, cars, 15 million, and laboratory reagents, interesting enough, 1 million. So that's interesting. So what growth prospects exist then in Zimbabwe for Japanese products?
I know that the automobile industry is one of the strongest sectors in Japan, and I believe that the automobile market in Zimbabwe still has a lot of potentials in the future. I think there will be a growing demand for more fuel-efficient hybrid vehicles, as well as maybe electric vehicles in the longer term. This is especially true because we are faced with the increasing risk of climate change, and people are more aware of high fuel costs and pollution associated with conventional vehicle may bring about. Also, I believe that Zimbabwe could become a big market for green technology as well as digital technology. Japan produces advanced technology in these fields. This includes renewable energy solutions, which can help Zimbabwe to mitigate environmental problems.
So that's interesting, because then when you talk about electric vehicles, obviously with our huge lithium deposits, those are some of the attractive areas to invite Japanese companies to come and invest in, particularly if they can take it home, obviously, and be part of their production process. And I also like the fact that you talked about how Zimbabwe can be a regional basis for the African Continental Free Trade Area. So instead of, you could set up production places in Zimbabwe to export into other African countries. Those are also opportunities, correct, for Japanese companies to explore. Yeah. Now, Ambassador, Japan is a highly developed economy, of course, often referred to as an East Asian model. It is the third largest in the world by nominal GDP and the world's second largest developed economy. So how can Zimbabwe leverage the relationship with Japan to also advance its economy and attain, as the president of Zimbabwe says, upper middle income economy by 2030?
Yes, we really hope that our strengthened cooperation contributes to Zimbabwe achieving that NDS1. To leverage our relationship, the Tokyo International Conference on African Development, or TICAD, that platform can be really one of the very useful platforms Zimbabwe may want to utilize. Japan set up the TICAD platform to mobilize support for sustainable development in Africa. And at TICAD 8 that was held last year, 3 pillars were adopted, which are realizing a structural transformation for sustainable development and realizing a resilient and sustainable society and ensuring peace and stability. Japan committed to invest $30 billion over the next 3 years for sustainable growth in Africa. Increasing investment of Japanese companies in Africa and investment in startup companies were also the top of that agenda. And it goes without saying that Zimbabwe has a huge potential in the mining and agriculture sectors, for instance, which could be very attractive to Japanese companies. If a more favorable business environment is developed, it would stimulate more trade and investment by Japanese companies. The government of Japan will therefore continue to support infrastructure development, capacity building for the key sectors.
So, we now turn to technology. Now, we all know Japan is highly advanced in technology, automation, and also a global leader in robotics, natural sciences, aerospace exploration, and biomedical research. And these are all areas that it's well known Japan's strength, some of the strength lies. In 2022, Japan was ranked 13th in the Global Innovation Index by the World Intellectual Property Organization, rising from 16 in 2020. So what opportunities for skills transfer exist between Zimbabwe and Japan, especially in the area of technology?
I agreed. The human development, the capacity building is very important. And I believe there are some opportunities for these kind of skills transfer. For example, Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science and Technology of Japan, it's a very long name. It has a scholarship program, and many Zimbabweans who have studied in Japan under such a scholarship. And some are there now completing their undergraduate and postgraduate studies. And JICA also provides short-term training courses in Japan to Zimbabwean government officers to improve their skills and learn the latest expertise in their respective fields. In addition, there are a number of Japanese volunteers here in Zimbabwe. They are actively teaching various skills and know-how, such as baseball, judo, computer technologies, and tourism at the various institutions. Actually, I really feel this kind of real human interaction is very, very useful for us to understand each other and deepen our relations. And JICA is also transferring skills in some sectors. For example, JICA experts are training farmers and extension workers to practice market-oriented horticulture farming through the Zimbabwe Small Horticulture Empowerment and Promotion Project.
Yeah, you're interesting. I know Japanese like their baseball. I went to a baseball game once in Tokyo. It was very nice. Now,
and I also hope that in the future, Japan will also share its expertise in disaster prevention with Zimbabwe, because Japan is a nation that regularly experiences natural disasters such as typhoons, earthquake, floods, and volcanic eruptions. And we have developed very advanced disaster prevention systems. I believe that such expertise will be beneficial for Zimbabwe in this era of climate change. Although you don't have any earthquake here in Zimbabwe.
Well, we do have Cyclone Idai, I think that was terrible.
Very important to be prepared for those kind of disasters. And finally, the GIMSAT-1 was recently launched. It's a satellite. It is a kind of symbol of a cooperation between our two countries. And it was developed by 3 Zimbabwean scientists who were studying at the Kyushu Institute of Technology in Japan. It's really amazing.
It's amazing. That's really going to help us to be able to look at our crop structures, where we're growing and so forth. So it was developed in Japan and obviously put into space with the help of some of the university in Japan. So one thing you did mention just now was about Japan's continuing to assist Zimbabwe in infrastructure development. I mean, the World Bank estimates that Zimbabwe needs about 30 billion United States dollars over the next 10 years just to get our infrastructure in some sort of regular shape. And of course, infrastructure in Japan, urban infrastructure, some of the best in the world. And your approach to infrastructure development unfolds in response to distinct phases. That's according to the World Bank. And I'll just highlight them too. I'm sure you know them. The first was the post-war period, characterized by high economic growth and rapid urbanization. The second was a period of moderate growth, followed in the 1970s. The third phase began in 1991 and continues today, characterized by GDP growth and a national economy increasingly resilient and reliant on the country's urban centers. So Zimbabwe has an infrastructure deficit, as I said, and even the World Bank acknowledges that. What lessons can Zimbabwe adopt from Japan's infrastructure development narrative?
Thank you for your very important questions. The Second World War had devastating impacts for Japan, with Tokyo and many other cities mostly totally destroyed. However, Japan was able to quickly reconstruct from the ashes of the war. I think there are many factors contributing to this economic growth, and I will highlight just a few main ones. One of the major factors is technology development. Japan is a country with scarce natural resources, so manufacturing was the only way to generate a trade surplus. Japan not only imported the new technologies, but also improved them and devised new leading-edge technologies. Also, we made a massive investment in the social infrastructures, as well as the construction of manufacturing and other facilities through various financial schemes. For example, Japan lacked those days funds for reconstruction, and the US provided a huge amount of relief and reconstruction assistance. This was used to finance low-interest loans for economic reconstruction, including currency stabilizations and infrastructures such as national railway, telecommunications, electricity, shipping, and coal power. We also received loans from the World Bank, which contributed significantly to the development of critical infrastructure and key industries, particularly in the road, power, and steel sectors, which were the foundation of Japan's post-war economic development. At the same time, I would add another very important factor contributing our economic development was the well-educated and diligent workforce. Human resource development is always the really basis of the development in any countries.
Now, I hope I pronounced this correctly, Ambassador. Japan's key initiatives, is that how you pronounce it? QII? Is it key? Key initiatives in its urban centers help transform some of Japan's cities like Toyama City, where an integrated approach to urban and transport planning through the city's light rail transit, LRT, help reduce congestion and pollution. So, what sort of solutions, in your view, can be explored, particularly in Zimbabwe's public transport system from Japan's own, which is very efficient? I remember in Japan, if it says 2 minutes past two, you better get there at 2 minutes past two because that's when the train leaves, for example.
You referred to a quality infrastructure investment, maybe. That is a very, very important driver of the development. But simply building more infrastructure is not enough to achieve a quality growth that is inclusive, sustainable, and resilient. For example, it might be attractive to choose infrastructure projects that have really low initial investment. However, in the end, such projects may not provide an effective solution due to such things as high operation and maintenance cost or unfeasible debt repayment plans. That's why a quality infrastructure investment was really established by the World Bank and Japan to provide support for well-built and sustainable infrastructure that ensures quality growth. Its principle that was discussed at G20 summit in Osaka in 2019 that includes openness and transparency, economic efficiency, the considering life cycle costs, and debt sustainability. Although Japan's situation is very different to Zimbabwe's, I believe that the principles of quality infrastructure investment can offer a good guidance or reference for Zimbabwe's infrastructure development, such as public transport. And as a first step, I think existing infrastructure needs to be refurbished. I hear that Zimbabwe once had a very efficient public transport system, including a fully functional railroad network, even with electric track, and a public bus network within Harare. Though this infrastructure has fallen into disrepair, it can be refurbished, and I think it is very important to take a fresh look at its value. Development of quality infrastructure may require maybe a large initial investment, and I understand it is difficult for Zimbabwe to apply for loans for this from international financial institutions, especially, or donors at this moment. To this end, it is very important for Zimbabwe to steadily implement its own reform agendas that have been really duly recognized by the discussions at the debt resolution dialogue process in the last few months.
Ambassador, there is one area of concern and debate in Zimbabwe, and that, of course, is the amount of used car imports that are coming from Japan, and they're very popular, of course, here in the country. But one of the concerns is the age of the vehicles and the allegations that some suppliers in Japan are really using us as a dumping ground for their old cars. I mean, is this area a concern to you as the ambassador to Zimbabwe or not?
Thank you, but I have been a little bit puzzled because I have never heard of such allegations. Of course, I know that many second-hand cars have been imported to Zimbabwe or maybe other African countries, but I think it is because the market prefers safe, clean, comfortable, and affordable cars. But on the other hand, of course, I understand someone may have some concerns on the safety or environment and other social reasons That's understandable. That's why every country has its own laws and regulations in order to protect its people and the environment. Any company needs to comply with that kind of regulations wherever they conduct their business. As a matter of fact, Zimbabwe introduced, I understand, a new regulation that is going to that has already prohibited the importation of old vehicles, very old cars, into Zimbabwe. One thing I'd like to share from Japan's case, not having sufficient natural resources, is that building a circular economy is a very essential requirement, not just for the environment, but also for the economy. All the materials are recycled and used as precious resources for the subsequent manufacturing processes. Then we actually cannot afford to throw away any waste. And now more than 95% of the waste of automobiles is being recycled.
So let's move on to water. Obviously, water is a human right. It's part of the Sustainable Development Goals, the right to potable water. And in fact, all countries in the world have accepted that. And access to improved water sources is now universal in Japan. In fact, 98% of the population receives piped water supply from public utilities. Now, Zimbabwe, on the other hand, of course, does have issues with infrastructure, has issues with the water supply, particularly in the capital, Harare. In fact, so much so that we have had a recent cholera outbreak in the city, which is quite serious, and in fact across most of Zimbabwe because of challenges of that lack of basic amenities. So I suppose the question is how did Japan manage to develop and advance in this area? I mean, look at your population size, look at the density of your population. Obviously, your water sources and your water infrastructure has to be really on point for you to be able to satisfy all those citizens of yours. Again, what lessons can we take away from the way that Japan implemented that water policy to make sure that all citizens, or 98% of your citizens, have access to basic human right, which is water?
Yes. Also in Japan, until the late 19th century, water for domestic use came from wells and other natural sources, which often caused the outbreaks of cholera or other infectious diseases. I remember even when I was a child, I saw a lot of dysentery patients in my neighbors. Based on these experiences, water systems were developed to provide a stable supply of safe water from the public health perspectives of preventing infectious diseases. In 1890, the Waterworks Ordinance was promulgated, and since then, the government has been responsible for the development of the water supply system. And in 1957, a new Waterworks Act was enacted, which established regulatory standards for water quality and facilities. The government manages the water supply business by authorizations. However, it is important to note that even if clean water is provided, if it becomes contaminated by really careless behaviors during the distribution process, it cannot be clean anymore. So it is also important to make people aware that it is everyone's duty to keep the water clean as a public property. All users need to cooperate to ensure the proper functioning of the water supply system through such actions as paying water charges, for instance, and not discharging sewage or garbage or anything into the system.
Well, that was Ambassador Satoshi Tanaka, the representative of Japan to Zimbabwe, talking a very extensive interview with us here on ZTN Prime, Our Conversations. We talked about tourism, trade, culture. We've been talking about whether the ambassador can do judo or karate or not. But anyway, please tune in to ZTN Prime every Friday on our Facebook page, Zim Papers TV Network, to watch our conversations, the program where I speak to leaders around Africa and the world. I speak to ambassadors, movers and shakers. I'm Andy Hodges. Goodbye, and please, you all be safe.